She trusted him more than anyone in the world. He was family, her uncle, her protector, her safe place. The man who picked her up from work when it was late. The man who made her laugh when life got hard. The man who stepped in when her own father walked away. But one night, in a Walmart parking lot, that trust shattered into 1,000 pieces. And Mitchell's life, the life of a 22-year-old woman who thought she knew what safety felt like, was never, ever the same again. This is a story about betrayal, about the danger that hides behind familiar faces, about the silence that protects the wrong people, and the courage it takes to break it. Before we continue, remember, these stories are told to raise awareness and protect others. If you believe awareness can save a life, tap subscribe, and let's keep spreading the truth together. Mitchell grew up in a small town in Georgia, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where Friday night football games were the biggest event of the week, and where family meant everything. She was 22 years old, with long brown hair that she always wore in a ponytail, a smile that could light up a room, and dreams bigger than the town she grew up in. She worked the evening shift at a local diner, saving every dollar she could to go back to school. She wanted to be a nurse. She wanted to help people. She wanted to make something of herself. But life hadn't been easy for Mitchell. When she was 15, her parents divorced. It was messy, painful, the kind of split that tears families apart and leaves scars that never quite heal. Her father left town, started a new life in another state, and the calls became less frequent until they stopped altogether. Her mother worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on, and Mitchell learned early what it meant to be on your own even when you weren't alone. That's when Uncle Darryl stepped in. Darryl was her mother's older brother, 43 years old, divorced, no kids of his own. He was the kind of man who always seemed to be around when you needed him. He'd show up at Mitchell's basketball games when her father didn't. He'd help her with her homework when her mother was working late. He'd take her out for ice cream after a bad day and tell her everything was going to be okay. And she believed him, because he was Uncle Darryl. He was family. He was safe. Over the years, their bond grew stronger. Darryl became the father figure Mitchell desperately needed. He taught her how to change a tire, how to check the oil in her car, how to stand up for herself. He gave her advice about boys, about school, about life. He was there for her high school graduation when her father wasn't. He helped her move into her first apartment. He was the person she called when she needed someone to talk to, when the world felt too heavy, when she needed to hear that she was going to make it through. Mitchell trusted Darryl with everything, with her fears, her dreams, her secrets. She trusted him with her life. And why wouldn't she? He'd never given her a single reason not to. But somewhere along the way, something started to change. It was subtle at first, so subtle that Mitchell didn't even notice it, didn't recognize it for what it was. Darryl started becoming more protective. Too protective. He'd ask her where she was going, who she was going with, what time she'd be home. At first, Mitchell thought it was sweet. He cares about me, she told herself. He just wants to make sure I'm safe. But then the comments started. Comments about what she was wearing, about how her jeans were too tight, about how her shirt showed too much, about how she needed to be careful because men would get the wrong idea. Mitchell would laugh it off, tell him he was being old-fashioned, that she could take care of herself. But Darryl wouldn't laugh. He'd get this look in his eyes, this intensity that made her uncomfortable, and he'd say, "I'm just looking out for you, Mitchell. You don't understand how men think. I do. And I'm telling you, you need to be more careful." Then there were the questions about her boyfriend, Jake. Darryl had never liked Jake, even though they'd only met twice. He'd ask Mitchell what they did together, where they went, if she was being careful. The questions felt invasive, too personal, but Mitchell brushed it off. "He's just being protective," she told herself again. "He doesn't want me to get hurt." But the truth was, Darryl's presence was starting to feel suffocating. He'd show up at the diner unannounced, sit at the counter, watch her work. He'd text her constantly, asking what she was doing, who she was with, when she'd be free to talk. If she didn't respond right away, he'd text again, and again, and again. Mitchell started to feel this heaviness whenever she was around him. This discomfort she couldn't quite name. There were moments, brief moments, when she'd catch him staring at her in a way that made her skin crawl. Moments when he'd hug her just a little too long, when his hand would linger on her shoulder, when he'd stand just a little too close. But every time she felt that discomfort, that little voice in the back of her mind whispering that something wasn't right, she'd shut it down. This is Uncle Darryl. He'd never hurt me. He loves me. I'm just being paranoid. Because that's what we do, isn't it? We make excuses for the people we love. We convince ourselves that the red flags we're seeing aren't really there, that we're overreacting, that we're being unfair. Because acknowledging the truth, acknowledging that the person we trust might not be who we think they are, is too terrifying to even consider. So Mitchell pushed those feelings down, buried them deep, told herself she was being ridiculous, and she kept trusting Darryl, kept believing that he was safe, even when every instinct in her body was screaming that something was wrong. It was a Tuesday night in late September. Mitchell's shift at the diner ended at 11, and the parking lot was nearly empty by the time she walked out the back door. The air was cool, autumn finally breaking through the summer heat, and the streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement. Mitchell was exhausted. It had been a long shift. Her feet hurt, and all she wanted to do was go home, take a hot shower, and crawl into bed. Her car was in the shop, something wrong with the transmission that she couldn't afford to fix, so she'd been catching rides with co-workers or taking the bus. But tonight Darryl had offered to pick her up. "Don't take the bus this late," he'd texted her earlier. "I'll come get you. It's not safe." And Mitchell, grateful for the ride, had agreed. She stood by the back door of the diner, her phone in her hand, scrolling through social media while she waited. A few minutes later, Darryl's truck pulled into the parking lot, the headlights cutting through the darkness. Mitchell walked over, opened the passenger door, and climbed in. "Hey, Uncle D," she said, buckling her seatbelt. "Thanks for picking me up." Darryl didn't respond right away. He just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. Mitchell glanced over at him, concern flickering across her face. "You okay?" she asked. Darryl turned to look at her, and there was something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Something dark, something that made her heart start to race. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'm okay. But we need to talk." Mitchell's stomach dropped. Those 4 words, "we need to talk," they never meant anything good. She shifted in her seat, suddenly aware of how empty the parking lot was, how far away the diner felt even though it was right there. "Talk about what?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Darryl didn't answer. He just put the truck in gear and started driving, not toward Mitchell's apartment, but in the opposite direction. Mitchell's pulse quickened. "Uncle D, where are we going?" she asked, her voice sharper now. Darryl's jaw tightened. Just give me a minute, Mitchell. We need to talk, and I can't do it at your place." Mitchell's hands started to shake. The discomfort she'd been feeling for months, the discomfort she'd been ignoring, came rushing back all at once, louder and more insistent than ever before. "Uncle D, I want to go home," she said firmly. "Please, take me home." Darryl pulled into the parking lot of a closed Walmart, the lot dark except for a few scattered streetlights. He put the truck in park, turned off the engine, and sat there in silence. Mitchell's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She reached for the door handle, but Darryl's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. "Don't," he said, his voice low and cold. Mitchell froze. The fear that had been building inside her erupted into full-blown terror. "Let go of me," she whispered. Darryl's grip tightened. "I can't do this anymore, Mitchell," he said, his voice shaking. "I can't keep pretending. I can't keep acting like I don't feel this." Mitchell's breath hitched. "Feel what?" she asked, even though part of her already knew the answer. Part of her had always known. You, he said, turning to look at her with eyes that were desperate and hungry and wrong. I love you, Mitchell. Not like an uncle. I love you. And I know you feel it too. No, Mitchell said, her voice breaking. No, I don't. Uncle D, please, you're scaring me. Let me go. But he didn't let go. Instead, he leaned closer and Mitchell's entire body went rigid with fear. She tried to pull away, tried to open the door, but his grip was too strong. And then in that dark, empty parking lot with the person she trusted most in the world, Mitchell's sense of safety shattered completely. What happened next? The moments that followed, they were moments that would haunt Mitchell for the rest of her life. Moments she would replay over and over, wondering if there was something she could have done differently, something she could have said to make him stop. But the truth is, there was nothing. Because this wasn't her fault. It was never her fault. When it was over, Darryl sat back in his seat, breathing hard, his face twisted with shame and anger. Mitchell sat frozen, tears streaming down her face, her entire body shaking. If you tell anyone, Darryl said quietly, his voice icy, no one will believe you. I'm family, Mitchell. They'll think you're lying. They'll think you wanted this. Mitchell didn't say a word. She couldn't. Her voice, her strength, everything that made her who she was. It felt like it had been ripped away. Darryl started the truck and drove her home in silence. When he pulled up in front of her apartment, Mitchell opened the door and ran inside without looking back. She locked the door behind her, slid down to the floor, and sobbed until there were no tears left. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The days that followed were a blur. Mitchell stopped going to work, stopped answering her phone, stopped leaving her apartment. She'd sit on the floor of her bathroom, her arms wrapped around her knees, and stare at the wall for hours. She couldn't eat. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back in that truck, feeling his hands on her, hearing his voice telling her that no one would believe her. Her mother called repeatedly, worried, asking if she was okay. Mitchell would force herself to sound normal, to say she was just feeling under the weather, that she'd be fine in a few days. But she wasn't fine. She was drowning. And the worst part, the part that made her feel like she was losing her mind, was that Darryl kept texting her, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just destroyed her entire world. Hey kiddo, hope you're feeling better. Let me know if you need anything. Miss you. Those texts made Mitchell want to scream, made her want to throw her phone across the room. But she couldn't bring herself to block his number, couldn't bring herself to tell anyone what had happened. Because what if he was right? What if no one believed her? What if they thought she was lying? That she wanted it? That she was trying to ruin his life? Darryl was respected in their community. He coached Little League. He volunteered at the church. Everyone loved him. Who would believe that he was capable of something like this? Mitchell started having nightmares. Vivid, terrifying nightmares where she was trapped in that truck, where she couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't escape. She'd wake up drenched in sweat, her heart racing, and it would take her several minutes to remember that she was safe, that she was in her own bed, that it was over. Except it wasn't over. It would never be over. Because the memory of that night, the feeling of betrayal, of violation, of being completely and utterly powerless, it lived inside her now. It had taken up residence in her mind, in her body, and she didn't know how to make it leave. She stopped seeing Jake, stopped answering his calls, his texts. He showed up at her apartment one day, worried, and she opened the door just enough to tell him she needed space, that she wasn't ready for a relationship, that he should move on. The look of confusion and hurt on his face broke her heart, but she couldn't tell him the truth. Couldn't tell him that the thought of being touched by anyone, even someone she cared about, made her feel like she was going to be sick. Mitchell withdrew from everyone, From her friends, her family, her life. She became a ghost, moving through the world, but not really living in it. And all the while, Darryl's words echoed in her mind. No one will believe you. No one will believe you. No one will believe you. And so she stayed silent, trapped in her pain, in her fear, in the suffocating weight of a secret that was slowly destroying her from the inside out. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of Mitchell barely surviving, barely holding on. She'd gone back to work, but only because she needed the money, and she moved through her shifts like a robot, taking orders, pouring coffee, smiling at customers even though she felt hollow inside. One evening, her coworker and friend Sarah pulled her aside during their break. "Mitchell, what's going on with you?" Sarah asked gently. "You haven't been yourself. I'm worried about you." Mitchell forced a smile, the same smile she'd been forcing for weeks. "I'm fine," she said. "Just tired." Sarah didn't look convinced. "You know you can talk to me, right? If something's wrong, if someone hurt you, you can tell me." And that's when Mitchell broke. The walls she'd built around herself, the walls that had been holding her together, they crumbled, and she started to cry. Not quiet tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. Sarah immediately wrapped her arms around Mitchell, holding her while she cried, whispering that it was okay, that she was safe, that whatever it was, they'd figure it out together. And for the first time in 3 weeks, Mitchell didn't feel completely alone. They sat in Sarah's car in the parking lot, and Mitchell told her everything. About Darryl, about the truck, about the betrayal that had ripped her world apart. She spoke through tears, her voice shaking, expecting Sarah to doubt her, to question her, to tell her she must have misunderstood. But Sarah didn't do any of those things. Instead, she looked Mitchell in the eyes and said, "I believe you." And Mitchell felt something she hadn't felt in weeks, a tiny flicker of hope. Sarah didn't let Mitchell go home alone that night. She stayed with her, made her tea, sat with her while she cried some more. And the next morning, Sarah said the words that Mitchell needed to hear but was too terrified to consider. "You need to report this, Mitchell. What he did, it's not okay. He needs to be held accountable." Mitchell's immediate response was fear. "I can't," she whispered. "No one will believe me. He's family. He'll say I'm lying." Sarah took Mitchell's hands in hers. "Maybe they won't believe you at first," she said. "But you deserve to be heard. And you deserve justice. You're not the one who did something wrong here, Mitchell. He is. And if you don't report it, he might do this to someone else." That thought, the thought that Darryl might hurt someone else the way he'd hurt her, made something inside Mitchell shift. Made her realize that her silence wasn't just protecting him. It was enabling him. It was giving him permission to do this again. 2 days later, with Sarah by her side, Mitchell walked into the police station. Her hands were trembling. Her voice was shaking, but she told her story. She told them about Darryl, about that night in the Walmart parking lot, about the betrayal of someone she loved and trusted. And as terrifying as it was, as vulnerable as she felt, there was also something powerful about finally speaking the truth out loud. Her voice, the voice Darryl had tried to silence, became her weapon. Her courage became her shield. And she was done being silent. The police listened to Mitchell's story with the seriousness it deserved. They asked her questions, detailed questions that made her relive that night over and over, but she answered every one of them. She gave them Darryl's name, his address, his phone number. She showed them the texts he'd sent her after that night, the ones where he acted like nothing had happened, the ones that made her skin crawl. Within 48 hours, detectives visited Darryl at his home. They asked him to come down to the station for questioning, and when they confronted him with Mitchell's allegations, Darryl didn't deny being in the truck with her that night. But his version of events was very different from hers. "She came on to me," he told the detectives, his voice calm, almost bored. "She's been acting inappropriate with me for months. I tried to stop it, but that night she initiated everything. I'm the victim here, not her." Mitchell had prepared herself for this. Sarah had warned her that Darryl would likely try to twist the story to make himself look like the innocent party. But hearing that he'd actually done it, that he'd tried to paint her as the aggressor, made her feel physically ill. The detectives didn't buy his story. They'd seen this before, the way perpetrators tried to shift blame, to manipulate the narrative. They knew the statistics, knew that family members were responsible for a significant percentage of sexual assaults, knew that the most dangerous people were often the ones we trusted most. They collected evidence, they took Mitchell's statement, documented her injuries, even the ones that weren't visible. They pulled phone records, text messages, anything that could support her account of what happened. And then they arrested Darryl. Mitchell wasn't there when they put him in handcuffs, but when the detective called to tell her, she felt a wave of relief so powerful, it brought her to her knees. He'd been arrested. He was being held accountable. She hadn't been lying. She hadn't been crazy. She'd been telling the truth, and someone had finally believed her. But the relief was short-lived, because what came next was even harder than reporting the assault. News of Darryl's arrest spread through their small town like wildfire, and the community Mitchell had grown up in, the community she'd always thought of as home, was divided. Some people supported her, her co-workers at the diner, Sarah, a few close friends. They rallied around her, told her she was brave, told her they believed her. But others, so many others, refused to accept that Darryl could be capable of such a thing. He's such a good man, they said. He coaches Little League. He volunteers at church. There's no way he did this. She must be lying. She must want attention. She must be trying to get money from him. The whispers followed Mitchell everywhere. At the grocery store, at the gas station, even at the diner. People stared at her, talked about her behind her back, some even to her face. One woman, a regular customer at the diner, actually confronted her. "You should be ashamed of yourself," the woman hissed. "That man has done nothing but help you, and this is how you repay him. You're destroying his life over a lie." Mitchell didn't respond. She couldn't, because what could she say that would make any difference? These people had already made up their minds, and even her own mother, the person who was supposed to protect her, was struggling to accept the truth. "Mitchell, are you sure about this?" her mother asked one evening, her voice hesitant. "Darryl is my brother. He's family. He's always been there for us. Are you absolutely sure this happened the way you said it did?" That question, that doubt from her own mother, cut deeper than any stranger's words ever could. Mitchell looked at her mother, tears filling her eyes, and said, "Yes, Mom. I'm sure. And if you can't believe me, then I don't know what else to say." The legal process was slow, agonizingly slow. There were hearings, depositions, meetings with prosecutors. Mitchell had to tell her story over and over again to strangers, to lawyers, to people who scrutinized every word she said, looking for inconsistencies, looking for reasons to doubt her. It was exhausting. It was traumatic. There were days when Mitchell wanted to give up, to drop the charges, to just make it all go away. But then she'd remember why she was doing this. She was doing it for the 15-year-old version of herself who'd trusted Darryl, for the 22-year-old woman whose life had been shattered in that parking lot. For any other woman Darryl might hurt if she stayed silent. And so she kept going, kept fighting, kept telling the truth, even when it felt like the entire world was against her. Because her voice mattered. Her story mattered. And she refused to let Darryl take that away from her. The trial was set for 6 months after Darryl's arrest. 6 months of Mitchell living in limbo, knowing that she'd have to face him in court, knowing that her entire life would be dissected in front of a jury of strangers. Her relationship with her mother became strained, tense. They still talked, but there was a distance between them now, a crack that Mitchell didn't know if they'd ever be able to repair. Her mother hadn't explicitly taken Darryl's side, but she hadn't fully taken Mitchell's either. And that silence, that hesitation, spoke volumes. Mitchell learned a painful truth during those months. That family doesn't always mean safety. That blood doesn't always mean loyalty. That sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. The community reaction was a mirror of the larger societal problem with sexual assault, especially when the perpetrator is someone known and trusted. People didn't want to believe that Darryl, the man who'd helped coach their sons, who'd fixed their cars for free, who'd always had a smile and a kind word, could be capable of something so monstrous, because accepting that meant accepting that they'd been wrong about him, that they'd trusted someone they shouldn't have, that maybe, just maybe, they hadn't been paying attention to the signs. Experts would later explain that this is one of the most insidious aspects of family sexual assault. The betrayal doesn't just affect the victim. It sends shockwaves through entire families, entire communities. It forces people to confront uncomfortable truths about trust, about safety, about the fact that most sexual assaults aren't committed by strangers in dark alleys. They're committed by people we know, people we love, people we never thought capable of such violence. Some members of the community did come forward to support Mitchell. Her boss at the diner made it clear that she had a job for as long as she wanted one. Sarah never left her side, not for a single moment. A local therapist offered Mitchell free counseling sessions, recognizing that she needed support to heal from the trauma. And slowly, very slowly, other women started coming forward. Not with accusations against Darryl, but with their own stories. Stories of assault, of harassment, of betrayal by family members, by friends, by people they'd trusted. Women who'd stayed silent for years, sometimes decades, because they'd been afraid no one would believe them, because they'd been told it was their fault, because they'd been too ashamed, too scared, too broken to speak up. Mitchell realized that her courage in coming forward had given these women permission to tell their own truths, that by refusing to stay silent, she'd opened a door for others who'd been trapped in darkness. And that gave her strength, gave her a reason to keep fighting even when it felt impossible. Because this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every woman who'd ever been told to be quiet, to protect the family, to not make waves. It was about changing the narrative around sexual assault, especially assault by family members. It was about making sure that victims were believed, supported, protected, not blamed, shamed, or silenced. The local newspaper ran an article about the case, about the importance of believing survivors, about the statistics that most sexual assaults are committed by someone the victim knows. The article quoted experts who explained grooming, manipulation, the way predators exploit trust and access. It talked about the long-term effects of sexual trauma, especially betrayal trauma, where the violation comes from someone the victim depends on for safety and love. Some people in the community read that article and started to understand, started to see the bigger picture, started to believe Mitchell. But others dug their heels in deeper, unwilling to let go of their image of Darryl as a good man, unwilling to accept that they'd been deceived. And Mitchell learned another painful lesson, that doing the right thing doesn't always mean people will support you, that justice doesn't always come with validation, that sometimes you have to stand alone in your truth, even when everyone else is telling you you're wrong. But she also learned that she was stronger than she'd ever thought possible, that her voice, her truth, was more powerful than any lie Darryl could tell, and that no matter what happened in that courtroom, she'd already won something important. She'd refused to be silenced. She'd refused to let shame and fear control her. She'd survived. The trial lasted 3 days. 3 days of Mitchell sitting in that courtroom, facing Darryl, watching him pretend to be the victim while she relived the worst night of her life. She testified, told the jury everything, and this time when she spoke, her voice didn't shake. She looked Darryl right in the eyes and told the truth. Darryl's defense attorney tried everything, tried to paint Mitchell as vindictive, as mentally unstable, as someone trying to extort money from a generous family member. But the prosecution was prepared. They presented the text messages, the timeline, the evidence that supported Mitchell's account. They brought in experts who explained grooming behavior, who testified about the psychological impact of betrayal trauma. And they reminded the jury that sexual assault isn't always a violent attack by a stranger. Sometimes it's a betrayal by the person you trust most in the world. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. 6 hours that felt like an eternity to Mitchell. She sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, Sarah holding her hand, praying that justice would be served. When the jury returned, the courtroom was silent. Mitchell's heart pounded as the foreperson stood and read the verdict. Guilty. Guilty on all counts. Mitchell's entire body sagged with relief. She'd done it. She'd told her truth, and a jury of 12 strangers had believed her. Darryl was sentenced to 8 years in prison. 8 years that would never erase what he'd done, but 8 years that meant he couldn't hurt anyone else. 8 years that said what he did was wrong, was criminal, was unacceptable. As Darryl was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, he looked at Mitchell one last time. And in that moment, Mitchell didn't see the uncle she'd loved. She saw exactly what he was. A predator. A liar. A man who'd betrayed the most sacred trust there was. But she also saw something else. She saw that he no longer had power over her, that his threats, his manipulation, his attempts to silence her had failed, that she was free. The months that followed the trial were difficult. Mitchell had won in court, but healing from trauma isn't something that happens overnight. It's not linear. It's messy and painful, and sometimes feels impossible. Mitchell started seeing a therapist who specialized in sexual trauma. Dr. Lisa Chen became a lifeline, helping Mitchell process the betrayal, the grief, the anger, all the complicated emotions that came with what had happened to her. In therapy, Mitchell learned that healing wasn't about forgetting what Darryl had done. It was about learning to live with it, to integrate the experience into her story without letting it define her. She learned about trauma responses, about why her body had reacted the way it did that night, about why she'd frozen instead of fighting. And she learned, most importantly, that none of it was her fault. Not the assault, not the betrayal, none of it. Mitchell also joined a support group for survivors of sexual assault, sitting in a circle with other women who'd been through similar experiences, who understood the shame and fear and anger she felt, was transformative. For the first time since that night in the parking lot, Mitchell didn't feel alone. She heard stories from women who'd been assaulted by fathers, brothers, coaches, priests, people they'd trusted completely, and she realized that what had happened to her was part of a much larger problem. A problem of power, of entitlement, of a culture that too often protects perpetrators instead of survivors. Slowly, painfully, Mitchell started to rebuild her life. She went back to school, enrolled in nursing classes at the local community college. She reconnected with Jake, who'd waited for her, who'd never stopped caring about her. Their relationship was different now, built on honesty and patience, and an understanding that healing takes time. She started sleeping better. The nightmares didn't disappear completely, but they became less frequent, less intense. A year after the trial, Mitchell did something that terrified her. She started speaking publicly about her experience. She went to local high schools, colleges, community centers, and shared her story. She talked about grooming, about the warning signs, about the importance of trusting your instincts even when it's someone you love. She talked about the power of speaking up, of refusing to stay silent even when it's scary. And she talked about healing, about the fact that surviving trauma doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're strong. The response was overwhelming. Young women came up to her after her talks, tears streaming down their faces, telling her that they'd experienced something similar, that they'd thought they were alone, that hearing her story gave them courage. Parents thanked her for educating their children, for teaching them that danger doesn't always look like a stranger. Teachers and counselors asked her to come back, to keep telling her story, because it was making a difference. And Mitchell realized something powerful. Darryl had tried to silence her, tried to make her believe that her voice didn't matter. But he'd been wrong. Her voice was the most powerful thing she had, and by using it, by refusing to hide in shame, she was not only healing herself, she was helping others heal too. Mitchell's relationship with her mother slowly improved. It took time and painful conversations, and her mother finally admitting that she'd been wrong not to believe Mitchell immediately. "I was scared," her mother said through tears. "Scared of losing my brother. Scared of what it meant if it was true. But I should have chosen you. I should have believed you from the start. And I'm so sorry." Mitchell accepted her mother's apology, but she also set boundaries, made it clear that their relationship moving forward would be different, that trust had to be rebuilt, that some things couldn't just be swept under the rug. 2 years after the trial, Mitchell graduated from nursing school at the top of her class. She got a job at the local hospital, working in the emergency department. And on her first day, wearing her scrubs with her name tag pinned to her chest, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. She'd survived. She'd healed. She'd turned her pain into purpose. And she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Mitchell's story is more than a crime. It's more than a court case. It's a warning, a reminder that danger can wear a familiar face, that trust can be weaponized, that the people who are supposed to protect us are sometimes the ones who hurt us most. Sexual assault by a family member is one of the most painful forms of trauma because it involves a betrayal of trust that cuts to the very core of who we are. It violates our sense of safety, our understanding of love, our belief that family means protection, and it leaves scars that go far deeper than physical wounds. Research shows that about 1/3 of child sexual abuse cases involve a family member. 1/3. That means countless people are carrying this pain in silence, too afraid to speak up, too ashamed to ask for help, too worried that they won't be believed. Mitchell was one of them, but she found the courage to break that silence. And in doing so, she not only saved herself, she potentially saved countless others from experiencing the same betrayal.